Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 2, Episode 16, How to Leverage Marketing to Fuel Your Expansion Selling. My name is Beck Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before you jump in, if you could do me a big favor, go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck for this session. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump into the content. So let's start with a bit of an agenda. As far as today's time, I wanted to split it up into 5 different sections. Number 1, I want to review the 4 types of expansion selling. So I go much deeper into these in another session where I talk about expansion selling, the 4 types, and how you can iron out a playbook for each one of them. But I just wanted to do a little bit of review so we can recap for our time. Number 2, how to leverage marketing to fuel pipeline for each type. So we're going to go into the different types of marketing and how can we make sure that we are really ironing and making sure these departments collaborate together to fuel that pipeline. Number 3, how to route and leverage demo requests for expansion selling. So we're even going to go into the inbound line and how we can make sure that marketing is not only fueling from the postbound perspective with content downloads, webinar registrants, etc., but how can they really fuel that expansion pipeline and be accountable for even demo requests for expansion selling. Number 4, we're going to go into assigning marketing a pipeline number. So this is going to be a pipeline number that's specific for expansion selling, so you can be strategic and have high intent whenever you are, or be very intentional whenever you're assigning a number to marketing so that you can make sure that irons into your go-to-market strategy. And number 5, we're going to go through a workflow on how to leverage MQLs once you have them coming through the pipeline. So let's start with the 4 types of expansion selling. So this is just a review. Again, if you go into this session on the 4 types of expansion selling and how to iron out a playbook for each one of them, I go much deeper. But in review, there are 4 different types of expansion selling that we're going to go into today with a 4.5 on the end in terms of resell, and we'll go into that. But number 1, the first type of expansion selling that you could do is basically selling the same functionality to the same type of user to additional users within that group. So I'll give you an example to make everything simple. Let's say that I am Drift and I sold 100 seats to LinkedIn, to BDRs, let's say. So that would be the initial land, and then the expansion sell could be I sell an additional 200 BDR seats to LinkedIn. So LinkedIn obviously has a number of business development representatives. I don't even know the head count, but our initial land is going to be 100. And this first type of expansion sell would be I would sell 200 BDR seats, same functionality, same department, to LinkedIn as a true upsell for expansion selling. Number 2 is also going to be an upsell, and this is me selling additional features or functionality to the same users within the same role, within the same relative org. So this, for example, let's say that Drift, they now are coming out with video, whereas they were initially just a chat box at the onset. So let's say that for LinkedIn, for instance, that 100 BDRs had bought a chatbot instance for Drift. And now Drift wanted to sell into them for video, for the BDR for prospecting efforts. So that expansion sell would be an upsell as well, but it would be additional features to the same core 100 BDRs that they had sold on the land. So they would get the additional expansion business off of selling those features into that core group. Number 3 is going to be a cross-sell. And this is going to be selling the same functionality to different users within a different role within the same relative org. So let's take our initial instance of I am Drift and I sold into 100 BDRs over at LinkedIn. And now I know that account executives can also use our video platform for self-prospecting efforts. So my land was 100 BDRs at LinkedIn, and now the expansion sell is a cross-sell to 100 account executives over at LinkedIn, for instance. And then number 4 is also going to be a cross-sell, and this is going to be cross-departmental. So let's say, for instance, this is the most typical prototype of what people think about when they think about expansion selling, specifically within enterprise, is the initial land would be 100 BDRs, let's say in marketing solutions for LinkedIn. And then LinkedIn also has talent solutions. And so Drift would want to cross-sell into the talent solutions division so they can not only get the 100 BDRs that was in marketing solutions, but they could also get 100 BDRs or 200 BDRs that are over in the talent solutions division. So that's the typical type of expansion sell that most people think of, especially within enterprise. but those 4 was standing. There is a 4.5 that I would kind of consider expansion selling, but it's not necessarily expansion selling on paper, and that is a resell. So a resell is when your user or your decision maker or whoever is signed on the dotted line churns. Let's say they move on. In the initial onset example of LinkedIn, I sold into someone named Ross, and Ross churned and went to another organization. And then someone named John came into Ross's role. And so I would need to put really footing down to make sure that John is not only good to go and that he understands and sees deployment and sees value in the platform, but really it's the latter case scenario of we want to make sure that John knows the inherent value of Drift, and so that he not only uses the product, but wants to use the product so that he doesn't take it out. So I think typically the saying goes that when someone comes into an org, usually they come in with their own people and they come in with their own tech. And so you want to make sure that John is really, really good to go and secure in his new role, and he understands how to use Drift and sees the value in it, so you don't see some unnecessary churn. So from my perspective, the lethal orgs, or the orgs that are really going to make an impact in the industry, are the ones that understand the value of resell, aren't scared of resell, and do it very, very well. This has happened in my career once to me very well. I came into an org, and I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Dan Smith over at Winning by Design. He's absolutely amazing, the Chief Academy Officer over there, and I inherited him as a trainer. And when I came into an organization, he basically knew that I wasn't the purchaser, that the purchaser wasn't there anymore, but that he knew the value of reselling into me because I was a new leader. So just because the pre-existing leader knew very, very well, the value prop of his company and what the work that he was trying to do, I was a completely fresh case and had no idea who he was. So he got ahead of that, was proactive, and resold into me essentially to secure, make sure, be prophylactic about the churn. But this is a 4.5 type of expansion sell. So the traditional 4 are, again, in review: upsell, upsell, cross-sell, cross-sell, upsell to more users within the same role, upsell to additional features to the core 100 BDRs, cross-sell to the account executives within marketing solutions at my land on LinkedIn, and then a cross-sell in terms of I sold into marketing solutions and now I want to sell into talent solutions within the same respective function. So now let's go into how can you fuel each one of those types of expansion selling through marketing. So most teams that I've looked at, there's some kind of inherent palpable gap between marketing and sales. Typically, salespeople will say like, hey, well, marketing isn't accountable. They're not on the line as much as we are. I get these lists of leads and they're quote unquote BS. And you go to the marketing team and you say, what do you think about the sales team? And the marketing team says, well, they only show up when there's something in it for them. They don't actually go through these lists. They don't know what they're talking about, et cetera. We do everything we can to enable them and they're just not there. But there is this palpable gap. And I think one of the reasons that there is that gap, it's not a personality thing, especially the scale that we're seeing it. It is a structure thing. It is an infrastructure thing of the way that we're passing through leads and the infrastructure of how we're KPIing people. It's just not adding up. So, this is a very, very big issue in the industry that I've seen multiple people certainly address in an emotional way on LinkedIn. So to go in deeper, I'm going to do probably a future session. If you go to Sales Hacker, I do a session on sales and marketing alignment and all the things that you can do to cause it from a KPI perspective. But today, let's zero in on expansion selling and how can we make sure that marketing is delivering aid and the type of aid that salespeople want to be very intentional about that expansion sell. So we're going to start with the type number 1, the first use case that I went into. And again, that was selling additional seats to the same core group. We sold 100 BDR seats to LinkedIn, and now we want to sell 200, the expansion of 200 BDR seats because they had 300 in total, but wanted to make sure that we were okay in deployment and security, et cetera, by only bottlenecking us at 100. But I am, full disclosure, extremely excited about today's content because this has, quote unquote, never been seen. And this is something that has been very, very successful for me in the past. So let's dive in. In terms of leadership, I'm going to break each one of these expansion sales down into 2 ways that you can fuel from a marketing perspective: leaders and groundswell. So some of you out there might be sitting there and thinking, well, we don't really call on people who are quote unquote groundswell. So we don't want to talk to individual contributors. We only want to talk for leaders. That's totally fine. So I would suggest, only listen to the leader portion and you can skip over the groundswell portion. But on a side note, groundswell is important. So, I would suggest if you have the time to watch for each section of this. But how marketing can cause expansion selling for the leaders portion for type number 1, again, that was selling 200 delta of BDR seats when I was drift to LinkedIn, is you can essentially, there's 8 pieces. So this is going to be brand awareness plus lead generation is what you're after in this case scenario. So we're going to put apart the piece of marketing that is after brand awareness solely for right now. But essentially, you can MQL or you can metric marketing and understand from a data perspective the following things that would cause hypothetically expansion selling that you can pipe through to your account executives or SDRs if they're prospecting. Number 1 is additional frontline leaders. You want to know the head count on additional frontline leaders that downloaded any content. So most of these are going to be quote unquote postbound initiatives is what I call them. So anything that's not a true inbound, it's not a hand raiser, and it's not a true outbound that they're cold and don't know you, but everything in between. So I nickname that postbound. So most of these efforts are going to be postbound efforts, but essentially you get the gist. You can metric the number of people within accounts that you've already sold into that there's a frontline leader who is downloading any kind of content. And this is additional frontline leaders other than the one that you sold into. So let's say when I was selling into LinkedIn that I sold into someone named Luke. So Luke aside, are there any other leaders at LinkedIn within the Marketing Solutions division that are BDR leaders that are downloading my content? Also, number 2, are there any additional leaders other than Luke within the BDR department that are attending any webinars that we're doing? Number 3, any of these leaders that are attending an event. So virtual event for now, since we're in COVID, given the mask on my Mona Lisa, but any kind of virtual event. Number 4, frontline leaders that are, again, outside of your initial decision maker, who are a part of the expansion cell that you're after. Are they visiting your website? Are they MQLing for any reason? Maybe that's their opening marketing emails or they're visiting your website en masse, and so all of a sudden they MQL. Additional frontline leaders with the high email open rate for any marketing emails. Additional frontline leaders post-deployment that basically are coming in through 6 Sense or Bombora. So this is going to be a dark funnel provider. So dark funnel providers are people who are doing research on your company on Google or a search engine, but haven't become a hand raiser or haven't downloaded any of your content yet. No, it sounds super creepy, but actually pretty successful in my experience. Reach out to me if you want any kind of referral. I know a guy over there at 6 Sense, really, really great. But basically, you want to metric how many companies are researching 6 Sense, or I'm sorry, how many companies on the 6 Sense platform are researching my company within the BDR department. And so you can assume at that point that it's not your initial buyer, because your initial buyer, there'd be no reason for them researching your company. And then also buyer intent. So buyer intent is any kind of company that is researching your company on G2 or any third-party review site, and you can pipe them through. Full disclosure for both of these, dark funnel and buyer intent leads, typically I have people call them if this is a cold account that we have not broken into yet. But for expansion selling, I would say actually these two I would just take as a really, really good sign of like, okay, if someone from LinkedIn is researching us, on G2, and we've already sold into them, it's probably some kind of leader or groundswell, et cetera. So it's a good sign that they're ready for expansion, but I think it's too loose of a hook. So in terms of marketing or measuring marketing against it. So when you're measuring marketing for expansion selling, I would stick for case number 1 for the leaders specifically. I would say stick with the content, webinar, event attendees, website, MQLs, or high email open rates. And again, this is going to be for, in this case scenario, leaders who are outside of the person that you sold into originally, that are within the function that you're trying to upsell into. So in our case scenario, it was LinkedIn. We sold into someone named, I think it was Luke. And so it'd be any kind of frontline BDR leaders outside of Luke that are within Marketing Solutions, because that was a division we sold into. Number 2, groundswell. So this is going to be, the difference between groundswell and leaders is going to be individual contributors versus someone who is a manager. So basically the same approach, and I wouldn't necessarily say that you should measure marketing against this, because salespeople typically don't want to quote unquote sell into groundswell, meaning they don't want their initial meeting to be with an individual contributor. They want it to be higher in the funnel. So, but this is a really good sign, and the lethal reps know how to not only cause groundswell, but to leverage groundswell in an account, so they can make sure that they're making the holistic sale. So same kind of approach, but I would be interested if I'm leveraging marketing to try to cause this first type of expansion sell. Again, that's going to be more BDR seats within Marketing Solutions at LinkedIn. Then I would be measuring or very, very focused on, okay, how many of these additional reps outside of the ones that are using my current product are downloading any content, attending any kind of webinar, at a virtual event, visiting my website, MQLing, or have a high email open rate for reps that aren't currently on the platform. So if you're doing selling correctly, if your deployment is correct and your product works, you're going to get a lot of internal talk about your product. So if I have a product that I deploy like Outreach, for instance, and all of a sudden, my reps are booking more meetings, if I was a leader or I was a rep within that same department who didn't have the tool yet, I'd be very anxious to get that tool. And so you really want to cause groundswell by getting them to download your content and understand, like, okay, you want them intertwined with your company. But again, for people who want to metric and fuel and call on and have initial meetings just with leaders, then I would just take this as a really good sign and only metric on leaders. So that is type number 1. So in review, type number 1 is you sold 100 BDRs at LinkedIn. You're trying to sell the delta of 200 at LinkedIn within the Marketing Solutions division. And so how you did it is you are essentially looking for, are there any other frontline leaders within that department that are BDR leaders that haven't actually purchased the software, so I can understand from a marketing perspective who are the leaders that I want to sell into in that first type of expansion sell that I haven't already that are taking a look at my content. Number 2, the second type of expansion sell is going to be you are trying to sell some kind of feature or some kind of product that's additional to your core product that you sold into those 100 BDRs. So let's take the instance of Drift. The 100 BDRs at LinkedIn that I originally sold into, the land was the chat box functionality. And now I want to, quote unquote, upsell by upselling them into the video functionality that they can use for prospecting. So for the same, we're going to break it down in the same 2 groups. So you have leaders and you have groundswell of how you can do this. So for leaders, I would want to be understanding from a marketing perspective, how many leaders that have currently bought my first product, how many leaders from the initial land that bought that first chat box functionality are downloading content that is relating to the new product or the new pain points that product solves for. So in the first case scenario, we were just after any kind of content download because this was a new user. Now we're after understanding, out of my core users who are using the chat box functionality, how many of those leaders are understanding and interested in the new product by way of our marketing materials. So typically a marketing team, especially a really good product marketing team, whenever a new product comes out, they're issuing out blogs or ebooks or resources or webinars or things for people to get to know that new product or that new pain point that they're solving for. So you want to understand in expansion sell number 2, where you're trying to sell those features, how many of your current users within an account that you want to expand by selling this additional feature is looking at content that has to do with that feature. So number of different examples here. You're going to start to see some trends. But, is those same core group leaders, are they down? So Luke, in this instance, who was the purchaser for the BDR team, is Luke downloading any content about the new product? Is Luke downloading any content on the pain points that product solves for? Is Luke attending webinars, that have to do with the product or the pain point? Is Luke landing on the website page that has to do with that specific product? Or is Luke MQLing on an email open for content for that new product? And the last example here is Luke opening emails for a pain point email that product solves for? So very, very similar approach in terms of holistically. But the first example, you're wanting to know, are these additional leaders within the same core functionality? Are they opening anything? Are they downloading any content? Are they interested in our product at all? Where in case number 2, you're wondering if your initial buyer, Luke, if he has downloaded any kind of content or been engaging with anything that's new product specific or speaks to the pain points of that new product. So you can understand from a marketing perspective, what is the level of interest from my core buyers before I go in and try an expansion sell. Groundswell, close to the same thing, but basically you just want to understand, is the groundswell reps are the groundswell reps, are they downloading any content? Are they attending any kind of webinar that talks about the new product or the pain points we solve for? So same exact lists, you're just substituting in groundswell. So again, full disclosure, if you're someone who says like, hey, I don't care about groundswell, all I want to know is marketing causing the leads with the people that I want to talk to, and the people that I want to talk to as leaders, then the previous slide is for you. But if you care about both and want a metric on both, this is a good outline on how to do it. Number 3, the third type of expansion selling is a cross-selling functionality. And remember, our original land was with Luke with the 100 BDRs at LinkedIn. And in the third type scenario, we want to cross-sell into the account executive with account executive leaders within LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. Both marketing solutions, different functions in terms of Luke was leading the BDR team, and now we want to sell into the account executive team, but they're all within the same department of marketing solutions at LinkedIn. So how you could fuel that from a marketing perspective, again, we're going to break it down into leaders and groundswell. Leaders, you are going to have a very similar approach to approach number 1. You want to understand, are there any AE leaders at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions that are downloading any of my content, attending any of my webinars, attending any virtual events, visiting my website, MQLing because maybe they opened some kind of email or they visited the website a lot. High email open rate for marketing emails, or are there any kind of account executive leaders that are coming in dark funnel or buyer intent? Full disclosure for buyer intent providers like G2, the reason that I said you shouldn't necessarily metric marketing on it is you cannot tell on the individual user who the user is. All you can tell is that the account that they are downloading, that they are taking a look. And so in expansion selling, the only thing that it can be used for really is a good sign of why would they be researching me after they bought unless it's a new user. However, I wouldn't give any kind of call because it's there's a lot of temerity and gumption in that because you don't really know who it is. So, but in terms of you get it, so I'm trying to sell into the AE leader. Let's call her, Cynthia. And so I want to understand, is Cynthia, who's the account executive leader, downloading any kind of content, whatever, that's related to my new product or not, any kind of content from Drift, any kind of Drift webinar? Is she attending any kind of event? Did she attend Hypergrowth, which is their big event that they have every year? Is she visiting the website? Is she MQLing, or is she opening any of kind of my marketing emails? So I can say, this is reason to believe that Cynthia actually likes our content. So it'd be a good time to sell into Cynthia because of that interest, at least with the alacrity of an outbound, very highly personalized outbound approach. So same thing for Groundswell. Again, this is for people who just want to understand Groundswell, some people love selling through Groundswell and really, really value that. So I would want to understand from a marketing perspective, any of the reps that answer into Cynthia, Are there any kind of reps that are downloading content, attending a webinar or virtual event, website MQLing, and opening any marketing emails? So I can understand, like, Cynthia is a much easier meeting to get if her reps are talking about you. So one of the things that I didn't foresee coming is when I originally started Flip the Script as this kind of rogue after-hour series when I was working at G2, is I was selling into CFOs at the time. I was working with, they had acquired a product called Siftery, they renamed it G2 Track, and the end buyer of that product was either operations or a CFO. So I started running these sessions just because I had found some stuff to be successful and I wanted to help reps in the industry. So I started this after sessions and coined it Flip the Script at G2. And I noticed that, it was a lot of individual contributors in the beginning. I was talking about cold emailing, cold calling. I left the process really out of it, but like, okay, can we just talk about, hooks and prospecting technique that will make you better? And the most stunning thing happened. These reps, out of repercussion, I'm assuming, they would stay after these sessions and they would say, how can we help you? And I'm like, well, I guess post on LinkedIn that you like this session. They're like, no, how can we help you in your core business? And I'm like, well, I sell into CFOs. I know that that's completely out of your role. You're an SDR, you're account executive. Like, you probably haven't even met your CFO if you're a mid-market company, much less have some kind of relationship. But the most stunning thing happened that they went down and they were banging down the doors of their CFOs and saying, you have to meet with her to give her some kind of meeting. They didn't know what my product did. They didn't know what I even really did with that product. But because I had built that rapport, I'm guessing, again, I was very thankful. They went to their CFO and they said, like, hey, we need to get a meeting. And I got a number of really high quality meetings doing it. Full disclosure, this is not a tactic that you should do. Don't start necessarily a series to do it. But the point still remains that groundswell can be powerful. So this was just a quote unquote individual contributor that was, going and really making an impact within the org. So I would be interested at a minimum level. Maybe I'm not going to metric marketing on it, and maybe I'm not going to call into this groundswell, groundswell reps. But I would still be interested in, is there groundswell at the account? And if there's not, how can I cause it to make my sale even easier? And then the last type of expansion sell, again, was our initial land was we sold 100 BDR licenses to Luke, who was the BDR leader at LinkedIn within Marketing Solutions. And the fourth type of expansion sell is that we want to cross-sell into talent solutions because we haven't sold into them yet. So that could either be BDRs or that could be account executives. But this is the prototypical, stereotypical cross-sell or expansion sell that most people think of within enterprise. So leaders, you would want to know and you're going to start again to see some trends here. For cross-departmental leaders, let's call this third leader that's either a BDR or AE leader over in Talent Solutions in LinkedIn that we want to cross-sell into. Let's call them Adrian. So I would want to understand, is Adrian downloading any content? Is he attending any kind of webinar, any kind of event, website, MQLing, opening any marketing emails? And then also, are the reps that report into Adrian, are they downloading any content, any kind of webinar, virtual event, attendee, website view, MQL? Like all of these full disclosure are typically the same, but you just want to understand, is Adrian or is the members of his team downloading any of this kind of content? So it can be a leading indicator of, oh, I need to sell into this person. And it also can make it easier for me if I know that that's the goal and I can understand like the volume of people that are downloading this content. So those are the four types of what you're after, what you're looking for. Now let's transition into how to route and leverage demo requests for expansion selling. So I have two real steps here. Number one, I would have a normal inbound BDR team process pass through to the AM or upsell team or an account executive if you don't have the upsell team. So this is going to be dependent on how your team is set up. In some teams, AEs are responsible for upselling. Some teams, CSMs are. Some teams have a dedicated AM RM team for cross-sell, upsell, renewal. But in this case scenario, you see the point that I basically would pass through this demo request from the inbound team, and I would want to measure how many demo requests are coming in through expansion selling. So in the first case, that would be additional BDR leaders within marketing solutions for LinkedIn. And the second request would be the same core user, Luke, the BDR leader at LinkedIn Marketing Solution that wants to have a demo based on the new product. In a third case scenario, it would be the account executive leader, I think it was Cynthia, within Marketing Solutions for LinkedIn, that you wanted to cross-sell into the AEs. And then the fourth case scenario is going to be the talent solutions leader that is a part of LinkedIn for the typical cross-sell. But you want to measure and metric all four of those different kinds of demo requests so you can bifurcate out. The number one tip I have for anything, whether that's data, whether that's MQL pass-through, whether that's SQL pass-through, whether that's expansion selling or new land selling, or that is, renewal or churn, is number one, get as much data as you can. And number two, bifurcate those results out. I've seen a lot of teams not be able to understand their data because they were, for instance, they were saying, okay, our average conversion rate from first appointment to close is 23%. And I'm like, well, time out. Your outbound was 6% conversion, and your inbound was 42% conversion, or whatever the delta is there. So, on the inbound, that's a great conversion. But on the outbound, you actually are suffering quite a bit according to industry average. So the more that you can split up within reason, the better your data points, so you can understand what is the narrative here and what am I trying to solve for. So I know a lot of people say more generic the better so that people can understand it. My argument is that people understand complex systems just fine. If they are in business, if they are a leader within a very reputable business, then they have made a career out of learning and understanding very, very complex problems. So instead of baby fooding leaders and saying okay, for instance, I purchased a whole bunch of webinar leads and content downloads and et cetera through a third-party provider like Gartner. And so our MQL number shot up from 1,000 to 3,000. I've seen this happen firsthand. Our MQL number shot up from 1,000 to 3,000, but people aren't calling on those content downloads or those webinar registrants because they weren't high quality. So net, we still ended up with 30 meetings beforehand and afterwards, and we spent $200,000 to do it. So you need to split out each one of these components of the inbound funnel into inbound, postbound, and outbound, and understand at each hitch of the way of I would always rather have more data than less data, and be married to that data and understand, what is the story that it's telling me, not how can I come up with a theory and then let the data justify it. So I would seek for the data first and then build a narrative based on that data. I think it was Sherlock Holmes that said, if you come up with the theory first, you'll find yourself wielding the facts to tell the narrative that you want it to tell, as opposed to the opposite way around. So point being, number one, I would pass through those demo requests to the cross-sell, upsell, AE or CSM team, and I would measure that. TLDR, it's a pretty simple process. I would just want to understand how many of these demo requests that are coming through are true expansion selling demo requests. Number four, before I go on, sometimes people request a demo from your current account, not because it's an expansion sell, because they wanted to get a hold of their CSM. So be careful. Be careful to use that in your metric. If they were just looking for some kind of bug fix or whatever, I would throw them out of the pile. So number four, now we know the four types of expansion selling. We know what we're looking for, or what is acceptable evidence that there is groundswell or leaders that are getting engaged with the types of content that makes us think that they're ready for an expansion sell or tills the soil, so to speak. How do we assign marketing a number based on that? So for all the marketers out there who say that you can't tie things to ROI, that breaks my heart to hear that, because the more that you are tied to ROI and the more accountable that you are to ROI, I'm probably going to piss off a lot of people by saying this, that will get you a seat at the table. So I've seen a lot of marketers say how do I get a seat at the table? Why don't people respect marketers? And in the same vein, they're saying, oh, well, we don't have to be tied to ROI, and marketing is a good juju brand awareness thing. And to some degree, I agree. Marketing has two functions, brand awareness and lead generation. So brand awareness is going to be part of it, and there's some type of brand awareness that you just can't measure. So I had heard a brilliant marketer who's a good friend of mine actually say once, asking someone to hook ROI to brand awareness is like asking them to understand the one action their mother did when they were younger that made them know that she loved them. And I'm like, that's true. Brand awareness, sometimes you get the good juju, some times you don't, and it's really hard to metric that. However, there is a massive lead generation component, and that can be metriced. The ROI there can be metriced if your pass-through is clean and your data is clean and you're very intentional about it. So to any marketer out there who's sitting there wondering, and this might be a sensitive moment, who's wondering why they don't have a seat at the table, I would argue the further away that you get from revenue and the further away you fight from that accountability to that revenue, the further you are fighting away from a seat at the table. So people who have a seat at the table are typically the people who are at point blank range when it comes to revenue. A VP of sales, they get churned if they're not doing well. They get a promotion and boatload of money if they are doing well. So it's like the closer you are to revenue, the closer you are to having a voice. So I would fight actually for a level of accountability within marketing. Again, not full, 25% of the KPI can be on brand awareness. Of like how many people did I get to this webinar, period, regardless of their validity or who they are, what company they work for, or their title. But then 75%, the lion's share, should be based on lead generation. Is this someone that I want to sell into that I haven't already sold into? So from a lead generation perspective, new lead generation perspective, that's pretty easy. Does this person hit ICC, meaning ideal customer company? Are they over 100 employees? Are they in the right industry vertical? Are they, do they have the right technographic setup? Are they selling in field sales? But ICT, do they have the right title? Are they the right buyer persona in the 5 respective disciplines that we sell into? And are they above the manager level, which is our minimum criteria bar? But that's for new lead generation. For expansion selling, I want to metric marketing and hold them accountable to how many people are hitting the buckets of what I outlined in the second section. How many people are leaders, and you can set the definition criterion wherever you want. How many are leaders of LinkedIn, who are additional leaders outside of Luke that are a part of the marketing solutions team over at LinkedIn and a part of a leader of the BDR team. So if there's 3 different leaders, let's call them, John, Kathy, and Nick. Okay, those 3 are John, Kathy, and Nick downloading my content, and if so, then I'm going to measure marketing against that. So again, there's a lot of complexity there in types of the 4 types of expansion selling, but let's talk about how you can assign marketing a number and get them not only some assignment and responsibility, but while doing so, a seat at the table. Number 1, from a postbound perspective, remember that inbound is a true hand raiser, outbound is cold and we don't know them and they don't know us. Postbound is everything in between. So I would assign a variable KPI to marketing saying one of these pieces of the KPI is for brand awareness. So if you get anyone at the accounts that we want to expansion sell into, let's say that's LinkedIn, Intel, Adobe, and IBM, is anyone from those 4 respective brands attending any kind of webinar, downloading any kind of content, etc. And this, because it's for brand awareness, can be anyone. It doesn't have to be an additional leader or someone very strategic, but I would say if it's anyone at Adobe who's attending, that kind of postbound initiative, then it builds brand awareness with the company. But keep in mind, I suggest very heavily that this is a low percentage of how marketing is measured. So you want to really pull them into the funnel, to empower them through responsibility and accountability. So the second piece is giving them a postbound number for a lead generation perspective. So in the first case, it was just, did anyone from Adobe download some of our content? Or in the second case scenario, it's, did anyone who's a BDR leader at Adobe in this example, anyone who's a BDR leader at Adobe who is outside of the decision maker that we already sold into. So Luke was our example in the first one. So is it the other 3, Kathy, and I can't remember their names, is it any of the other BDR leaders who we haven't sold into downloading the content? So I would give them some kind of number that can be matched up with these 4 different types of expansion selling leads, but some kind of number that marketing not only has to hit 10,000 people who attend a webinar from from LinkedIn, period, but they have to make sure that 1,000 of those people fit into one of these key buckets. Either number one, they're an additional leader outside of the current, the decision maker for the land sale, and type number one. So again, this was a BDR leader, so we want additional BDR leaders within marketing solutions for LinkedIn. Number two, are they a post-bound lead that essentially is downloading content that is the same core function buyer? So this was Luke in our instance. Is Luke downloading any kind of content that has to do with the features, additional features that we're just releasing, or any kind of pain point that that feature solves for? The third case scenario is the cross-functional sale. Is the account executive leader within marketing solutions at LinkedIn downloading any content? And number four is the cross-departmental sale downloading any content. So we started with Luke, who is the BDR leader at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. Is anyone from LinkedIn Talent Solutions who is a leader downloading our content, attending a webinar, event attendee, et cetera? So number one, they have a metric for brand awareness. Is anyone at LinkedIn downloading our content, period? That should be low, 25% of their variable. Yes, I do think that you should assign a variable to marketers. And number two, 75%, the lion's share of their KPI should be based on, from an expansion selling perspective, how many of these types of people did they get to engage with our content? Because net, that's the kind of people that your sellers want to sell into. And then number three, the third piece is pretty straightforward, but I haven't seen it done before, demo requests for expansion selling. So are there people who are demo requesting in the core respective functions? And it is not a CSM, ask of someone inbounding basically to say like, hey, I have a question. How many of those demo requests within the respective accounts that we want to expansion sell into are requesting a demo, and can we measure marketing? So in review, 3 parts. Number one, give them a metric for brand awareness, and that can be anyone who downloaded content, webinar attendee, et cetera, at the account that you want to expansion sell into. Number two, give them a number for the types of leads that you want to sell into that account for the 4 respective different types of expansion selling. So it was leaders outside of Luke downloading any content on the additional feature. It was the AE leader within marketing solutions for LinkedIn, or it was the BDR or AE leader for talent solutions within LinkedIn. And then also give them a number for demo request of expansion sales that are not people who are asking questions. So that was a lot. Let's finish off with workflow. So workflow, how you can really go through expansion selling, or how you can expansion sell very quickly, is number one, if you want to go to the session on expansion selling and the playbooks that I run for each one of them, that's probably much more in depth than this slide is going to be. But first 2 things, how I leverage these MQLs once I have them, is now I have all these juicy MQLs that are from marketing. What on earth do I say to them? Number one, I run the happiness playbook, more in the expansion selling session, but I run the happiness playbook and make sure that Luke, my core buyer, is happy. Number two, I build rapport with my core buyer. So I do that through a myriad of things. Full disclosure, I'd go to that session for more details. But I make sure that Luke, I'm genuinely providing him value. So whether that's through downselling, whether that's through building rapport with the people who are deploying the product, or checking in, not just when there's something in it for me, but I would run some kind of rapport playbook where you're trying to build rapport with Luke and the people who answer to Luke to make sure that you have a holistic grip on the account. And then for the 4 respective different types of expansion selling, I have the following. How you can leverage the MQLs once you have them is you can basically, in the first case scenario, so again, the first case scenario, you're trying to sell more seats into Luke with additional leaders that are BDR leaders. So I would say your approach could be, I notice a lot of your team is downloading content on the product. Can I be of any help? So you're busting into, a new section of this BDR team. And so you want to come to Luke and say, hey, Luke, reason for my outreach is honestly, I noticed a lot of your team was downloading some content, talking about, how to make convert website views more effectively. Can I be of any help? So in that case scenario, sometimes Luke won't know that this is happening, and sometimes he will, and he'll say, yeah, actually, you've done really well because of the first 2 playbooks. You've done really well with us so far, so we wanted to talk about some kind of, leveraging into the additional 200 BDRs. Type number 2, where you're after the additional features, If they are downloading that content that has to do with the feature, I would come to Luke and say, would it be interesting to set up some kind of meeting? The approach should be holistically. Would it be interesting to set up some kind of meeting to see if we're a fit for that new product? I'd say reason for my outreach is I noticed that you've been downloading a lot of content and attending a lot of webinars on our new product. You know, I don't mean to be pushy here, but would it be interesting for you at all to set up some kind of time to talk about these additional features and see if they might be a fit? Again, any kind of expansion selling, extremely hard to do if you haven't done step 1 and 2. You haven't made your core buyer happy, and if you haven't built rapport with them. Expansion type number 3, you remember you are going to another function. You started with Luke, who is a BDR leader, and now you're going over to the account executive leader. So I would never, ever, 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 ever multi-thread around my initial buyer. Ever. I cannot say that with more intent and heart. If you watch the session on multi-threading around your core buyer, you know more of why, but TLDR, the quickest way to break trust with anyone, not only for them, but for good, is to exclude them. So you don't want to multi-thread around your buyer, especially if you've made them happy, and especially if they're finding value from your product. You're in a good spot, so you don't want to multi-thread around them. You want to involve them, and you want to leverage them in the expansion selling process. So once I have MQLs that are in type number 3, so again, that's going to be AE leaders within the marketing solutions for LinkedIn, division of LinkedIn, I would ask for permission from Luke to go cross-sell. And he'll be like, wow, you don't need my approval. At least in my experience, that's what his approach will be. Oh, you don't need my approval. Like, I'm not your dad. You know, I'd say, I just wanted to check in and make sure that I didn't go around you. And I'd say, Luke, very quickly, any advice on how to sell into this person? So I've noticed that Cynthia's downloading a lot of this content. It seems like it's right. Any advice on talking to Cynthia? When you slip into the mentee chair and you ask advice from someone, that person, all of a sudden, you'll see them start to team up with you. So if you don't, if for a reference point, I want you to think through, do you like asking for directions? Typically the answer is no, or at least I don't. And do you like giving directions? Typically the answer is yes, because people like helping people. So if I'm not only not going around Luke, but I'm coming to Luke and saying like, hey, I just wanted to ask for permission, and he says like, hey, I'm not, not your dad, go ahead and do whatever you want. And then you say, okay, great. So this is Cynthia. Cynthia's the one that's been downloading the content. Any advice on how to hunt and, how to get a meeting with her? Not only might he be able to leverage up some advice, he is probably going to get involved in the process with you. In my experience, he'll say, let me make an introduction over to Cynthia, especially if you've done step 1 and 2 well. You've built a lot of rapport. You've made Luke happy. You've made Luke look like a genius. Okay, he is going to offer up, in a lot of case scenarios, an introduction to Cynthia if he knows her. And typically, if he's a BDR leader and they're an AE leader, they're peers, so to speak. And so he has kind of that way with her to make the introduction in a valuable way. Number 4, type number 4, again, this is marketing solutions over to talent solutions at LinkedIn. So this case scenario, especially, you're usually doing this kind of cross-sell with an enterprise because they're big enough to do this. And in that case scenario, there's not typically a relationship. So LinkedIn is big, very, very big. So it's like, people in the marketing solutions don't know talent solutions and vice versa. Sometimes they don't even know all the people within marketing solutions, even if they're in the department. So in that case scenario, I still would strive to understand from Luke, hey, is it okay if I go to this other person? I would say, hey, can I ask your blessing? And I would ask them, again, slip into the mentee chair and say anything that I should know about this leader, over in Talent Solutions. They've been downloading a lot of content. I just wanted to get your take. When you ask people for their take, all of a sudden they get the warm feelies and they want to help you. And so you might get some invaluable information. You might get an introduction. There's an off chance that he does know the person in the Talent Solutions division. But if nothing else, you don't torch the relationship or damage the relationship with your core buyer that you have worked tirelessly to make successful and happy. So in summary, I know that there is a gap. There is a palpable gap between marketing and sales dev, sales dev and sales. There is a palpable, ever-existing gap. but we have the opportunity to close that gap. So closing that gap through the providing MQLs through expansion sellings is one piece of the pie, but it's only one piece of the pie. So I'm excited to be on this journey with you guys of how can we close that gap, not by sending people out, for beers together to hope that they're friends, not that we, do visibility of whatever each other is up to, or not that we do these necessarily weekly or monthly meetings where everyone's coming in and they really want to leave the meeting and we're talking about what marketing's doing and what sales is doing and kumbaya. There is a way to do it, and the way to do that is by data. The way to do that is by pipeline, and the way to do that is by diagnosing what is the setup that we can have marketing support sales, and how can we bridge that gap through pipeline support. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session, you want to hear more just like it, if you go to flipthescript.co, and you'll see a bunch of different sales and marketing topics. If you really love this session, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, tag me in your top 2 takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of in future sessions. Either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day.